We would like to start out with a quote from an adoptive parent of a little Chinese girl.
There were so many little girls in the orphanage, the staff couldn't handle the volume, so they strapped the toddlers in these little green chairs. They didn't do it to hurt the children, it was just simply too much for them to handle.
Anyways, the little girls would sway in their confines to get some stimulation. Today, I look at my daughter and all I can think of is thank God she was saved from the little green chairs.
As the Chinese saying goes, women are like grass born to be stepped on. This is our documentary on women's rights in China.
The Chinese saying, "A mouse trying to pull a turtle out of his shell doesn't know where to begin," may describe how China tackled the particularly difficult problem of population control and the rights and responsibilities of women. Traditional Chinese society is male-centered. Fewer women were educated than men. In extreme cases, female infants were victims of infanticide or sold. The protests and efforts to improve women's roles in Chinese society began in the early 1900s. By the 1920s, female equality was common in urban areas. The number of girls attending schools and college had increased and marriages were based on free choice. Even though women had full legal equality with men, in practice their opportunities and rewards were not entirely equal. The liberation of women was dependent on their participation in the labor force outside their homes. The jobs they held were generally lower paying and less desirable than those of men. For example, women who were paid less staffed the textile industry. In addition, women had the double burden of full-time work outside the home as well as the household chores. China contains 1/5 of the world's population. Population control was targeted, and so were women. Immediately after the 1949 revolution, the Chinese government encouraged its people to have large families in order to increase the workforce depleted by years of war. However, production and modernization could not keep up with the growing population. The Chinese people had suffered from famine and severe flooding, and China wanted to be able to feed its people. So in the 1970s, in an effort to control population, the Chinese government set up a system of rewards and penalties designed to encourage one-child families. The policy consisted of 3 parts. 1. Delayed marriage would mean delayed childbearing. 2. Fewer and healthier births. And 3. 1 child per couple. The policy was intended for 1 generation.
I'm Debbie Wood. I have 2 beautiful children from China. I went in 1997 to get my oldest daughter Dee, who is now 6. And then I went again in 2000 to get my younger daughter Susie, who is 4 years old.
The birth control policy became 2-tiered.
Minorities were allowed to have more than 1 child. For example, Mongols could have as many children as they chose. Or, if both parents were only children, then the policy allowed more than 1 child if the children were spaced 4 years apart. In rural areas, the policy was more difficult to enforce and births went unreported. Another exception to the policy would be if the first child was handicapped. High rates of sterilization of women occurred when the birth control policy was implemented. Statistics indicated that the use of contraception methods rose from 13% in 1970 to 73% by 1988. The policy has led to human rights violations and sexual discrimination because Chinese families preferred male children. It is estimated on average that there are 105 male children to every 100 females. The policy prevented at least 250 million births in 23 years. Live births fell from 34 to 18 per 1,000 people between 1970 and 1979.
They wanted to make very, very sure, too, that you were just taking their girls and not their boys. And so actually the adoption agency that we went through gave us little cards because we were asked constantly, by the Chinese people, is that a girl or a boy? And we would hold up this little card that in Chinese it said, we're adopting a girl from an orphanage. The men would particularly not trust you, and so they would even go so far as to feel the genitals to make sure that you were taking a little girl.
Another Chinese saying says,
Looking at a leopard through a tube, all you see is one single spot. You won't see the whole picture. If you look beyond the single spot of one-child families to the rights and responsibilities of so-called planned reproduction, you will find many concerns. For example, in order to escape taxes and punishments for having more than one child, families did not report the birth of babies. Therefore, a proper education or social benefits were not received. At times, work units or neighborhood associations put severe psychological pressure on women to have abortions rather than having a second child. In most Asian countries, it is the children's duty to provide their parents with a good life. China is a highly competitive nation, and the mental health of a child from a one-child family might be at risk because of the enormous pressure to be successful.
Did the policy fail? In the 1980s, the total fertility rate has increased to 21 births per 1,000 people. Is it because the government can push families just so far? Did families resist? Was the government unwilling to use forceful measures? Or were families refusing to report female children?
A morning in the Chinese province of Hunan brings an unimaginable sight of cruelty and horror. Lying in the gutter of a bustling main road is the tiny, twisted body of a dead baby girl. She is naked, surrounded by only dirty pieces of hospital gauze. Nameless and unwanted, the newborn's been dumped by the roadside during the winter. Few of the locals hurrying by give her a second glance. To them, she is just one of the thousands of baby girls abandoned each year as a result of China's ruthless one-child policy. To the Chinese authorities, abandoned girls were merely worthless trash. The chilling death of this baby and countless others like her reveals the gross inhumanity behind the enforcement of China's one-child policy.
So since we had this bond with this wonderful woman in China, whose name is Yan Fang Wu, I thought that, I would write to her and see if the questions that I didn't get answered the first time, she would be willing to answer. Let me tell you several things. Pei Lan, which is D, was abandoned the day she was born. She was dropped outside a village where I found her the following day. It was very hot and the navel stump was still on and smelled filthy. Her life was on the edge of death. I found Shen Yu, Susie, 3 days after she was born. She was very skinny and unpleasing in appearance. I reared both of them for more than 1 year before I gave them to you.